Hey everybody, welcome to So Many Sequels, your summer camp for movies, is what we should have been saying this whole time.
It's
I'm
definitely
Josh,
what we should have been saying. Hi, I'm Garrett. Why didn't you
And
think of that earlier?
I'm David, because we're
because it wouldn't
dummies.
be a thing if we didn't think of it on the last episode of the month,
Yeah,
or of the
that's
season
our
at least.
style.
That
That's
is
our
our
gimmick.
style.
We come up with
Yeah,
great
that's true.
ideas right as we're
Right
finishing
at the end.
themes.
Right at the Man, that would have been great. Let's remember it in 4 years.
Yep, welcome to
That-
the show. We are talking Friday the 13th today. Very exciting because we're hot off of Friday the 13th as of this recording. Garrett watched
Yes.
it on the Friday the 13th like a serial killer. Not well, would a sociopath do that too? Maybe.
we all do. All
Maybe.
of the serial killers. So we have a whole
It's like
Friday
you
the
were asking
13th
for
party.
trouble. Is what I'm trying to
I
get at.
invited the demons in.
Watching Halloween on Halloween.
I gotta say, I had a Friday the 13th curse to start my day.
Uh-oh.
Oh, you did.
I gotta talk
I
about
saw
that.
your post about this.
Friday morning, I'm trying to go to. I'm getting my things to. I'm getting out the door ready to go to work. I shut the door. I lock it. I pull out the key. The lock came with it.
That's not good.
It's
The
true.
lock
the whole
came
whole
out
tube.
of the thing on the key, and there's just a little empty hole
You got to
in my
insert the
deadbolt
photo.
now.
Insert the photo
Wow.
right here.
Yeah. Whoever's editing, insert photo. I have one, and I was like, oh no, because it locked, and I'm outside.
Yeah.
So I had to call for some help, and I won't regale it all, but it was not just fixed. It took many a thing, well over an hour, to get into.
Did you have to get a brand new door?
I had to get a brand new lock and key.
Fair enough.
But even the man working on it, he goes, "I don't think I've seen a lock this broken before." And I said, well, it is Friday the 13th. And he goes, I guess this is my curse for the day. And I said, I
Oh
guess
my
it's
God.
mine too. And then we had a good laugh.
Well, that's
but then it
nice.
took
At least you
another-
had a nice little
It
locksmith.
still took another while to fix it. But you guys didn't have any Friday the 13th curses this year?
I gotta think.
Are you superstitious about it?
No, I like to test it actually. Especially when I was younger, I would always try to let me take advantage of all of the bad luck things that I can think of that won't get me into trouble. Obviously, I would not be breaking mirrors that were in the house or breaking things like that, and I was getting in trouble for that. But I'd walk under ladders. I'd open an umbrella here and there that was inside. I'd try to just see what happens. I throw some salt on the floor, not throw it over my shoulder.
Well, so this movie isn't really related to that curse at all. I don't really know why there's a Friday the 13th curse lore, because this movie is more about just a really tragic event that happened on Friday the 13th at Camp Crystal Lake in what is it, 1959? That's how this movie
1950
opens.
something, yeah.
Yeah, we'll get into the full movie here in a second. I know. So David, I want to open up the box office with one little thing I know, which is that this movie was more or less designed or conceived as a response to Halloween's success.
Yes.
And
Yes,
so,
it was.
did it work?
It did work. I mean,
Nice.
the Halloween was huge in terms of its inspiration and influence, and it took almost zero time for someone to say, "Got to make a version of that." So they started working on Halloween. Came out, I think, in 1978. Could have the year off on that. And they started working on this movie in 1979. So they very quickly got to work on replicating a Friday, and they were like, what can we call it? Friday the 13th, that's a spooky that's a spooky day. Let's work with that, I think. Because the original title was like The Curse of Camp Crystal Lake or something like that. Like that was the original title.
Not bad.
No.
Bad.
And accurate to the film.
Yeah.
So one detail about this movie, and I'll get into the box office of it in a second, but this was one of the first ever independent films to secure major studio distribution. This was a film where the guy who made it, Victor Miller and Sean Cunningham, I think, are the two guys who are mostly responsible for it. They actually put out an ad in Variety to market the movie well before they'd even finished writing it, in hopes of drawing attention for studios that are looking for a Halloween competitor, Halloween like movie. And so it secured major distribution both from Paramount in the U.S. and then internationally from Warner Brothers. And then the budget for this film was only $550,000. Like, they did not spend like a tremendous amount of money on this. I mean, $500,000's nothing that's something for us, for sure. But and then it had a huge return. So it debuted the weekend of May 9th, 1980. Ignored my notes here where I left last week's date in there. To 5.8 million. It was the number one movie that weekend against The Nude Bomb, which I did a little research on. Sounds like a really risque movie, but it was actually, The Nude Bomb was an adaptation of the TV show Get Smart. It was like a film adaptation of Get Smart. It was renamed for TV later. And then Kramer versus Kramer was also in theaters still that weekend. That's the only real information I have in terms of its box office weekend. It made about 5.8 million, which was pretty decent on a $500,000 budget, and probably maybe $1 million in advertisement. It went on to make 39 million in the U.S. It's reported to have an overseas run of about 20 million for a worldwide total of 59.8 million. That's huge. I mean, that's the classic cheap horror makes tons of money. Like, horror movies print money, and they're so cheap to make. This is one of the reasons why the movie got greenlit for 1 billion sequels, which we can definitely talk more about in a minute. It would go on to be the number 18 movie of 1980. Which in 1980, the number one movie was Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back. 9 to 5 at number 2. Stir Crazy at number 3. Airplane was number 4. I read a note that Warner Brothers, they distributed 17 films in 1980. The only movie to do better in terms of profit than Friday the 13th was Airplane. And then Any Which Way You Can was number 5. But a lot of great movies in 1980. We've done 5 1980 films. We have almost done one for every season we've had a podcast. Our first 1980 movie was Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, followed by Superman 2, The Fog, John Carpenter's The Fog, and The Shining. We've done a lot of horror movies from 1980 so far this year, or so far this podcast. But yeah, I mean, huge success when you can look at like what they had, and obviously the sequels kind of change they kind of move on to a completely different main antagonist, and they became iconic for an entirely different reason. But this is the movie that sparked a big long-lasting franchise.
Yes. So Friday the 13th. They were warned. They are doomed, and on Friday the 13th, nothing will save them. Camp counselors are stalked and murdered by an unknown assailant while trying to reopen a summer camp that was the site of a child's drowning. Garrett, this was your pick. So famously throughout the month, it took you a while to decide. What made you land on Friday the 13th, and then just kind of tell us what your expectations for it were.
It eventually just boiled down to how could I not? This movie is so tied to camp. When you think camp movies, I feel like this is easily one of the ones that everyone be like, oh, Camp Crystal Lake. Like, they know the name. They know it takes place at a camp. It's connected to so many, like, tropes that you see in camp movies. So I tried to avoid it. But the other options were also kind of more connected to the movies that you all picked. And so there was some counter-programming that went into it. And so for me, I've seen this movie so many times. When I was a kid, I would rent older horror movies on VHS or whatever, and I watched all the way up to, like, I think the Jason in 3D or whatever, when that was a thing. So I had seen a lot of these growing up. I've seen this one so many times and loved it. I've hated it. Last time I watched it, I was like, oh man, this is really bad. So I was kind of interested to see how this was going to go, because I wasn't sure it was going to hold up again, but it fit the theme, and I think that it was a good way to appreciate this movie in a different way than just a horror movie.
All right, David, you are not a horror guy, as we say pretty much every time we do a horror movie.
Mm-hmm.
So how was your approach to Friday the 13th, and what were you expecting?
Well, I was actually kind of excited because it is a classic franchise. It is like, an iconic title, an iconic of character in Jason. Obviously, Jason's not really a part of this one, but I was interested to see how it all began. Never excited for so many scares. Wasn't excited for early visit to so many scares. We have like Jeepers June, and was not.
Jeepers June.
I thought you might like that, but I was I kind of expected it probably to be a little dated. Like when I watched the original Halloween, I was like, wow, this film, like I can see the inspiration this film had on horror, but it is it's so much slower than you expect. I think, or what so much slower than how horror movies are. How horror movies are edited so fast paced nowadays, or at least can be. So it was interesting. So my expectations were kind of not super high because I kind of thought, well, it's 1980, it's the first one. It's on a shoestring budget, for even 1980. So maybe it's going to look a little cheap at times. But I was very interested to kind of like start this and to kind of know, maybe to see what would lead them to make 8 of these in 9 years, because they made 8 Friday the 13th movies between 1980 and 1989, and that is crazy to me. You talk about sequel reliance. They went overboard with, because they made 4 since 1993, which I think really says a lot about the interest level that there is for this franchise. Is that there were so many. There were so many in the 80s, and then there's been 4 since then. And one of those was a reboot or a remake or whatever.
Yeah, they're. I don't know. We're gonna have to. I want to read about it more and talk about it another time. Maybe kind of this current status of the franchise, because there's a lot of legal stuff. Last time I remember as to why they haven't done anything with Friday the 13th in a while, because they were making so many sequels, and then there
Sequels?
was like an oh 09 they were make there was an oh 09 reboot, and then there were some talks of some other things, but I think it's in some kind of weird copyright lawsuit limbo. I don't know. I'd like to know, because it does change a lot from here. This movie, you can't spoil a movie from 1979, but Jason's not the bad guy in this movie,
No.
nor is the iconic hockey mask even part of it at all. Like, everybody knows Friday the 13th as the image of Jason with the hockey mask, and it takes until the third movie, I think, is what I read, before the hockey mask appears as his thing, like his look. Garrett's
Yeah, that's
thinking as to
I,
determine if that's right.
part 3,
I
3D.
do. I think that is mostly correct. I remember seeing his face in the second one, but I can't remember when he showed up. So he had different things
Gotcha.
covering his face. But I
watched
do
the
think it
trailer
was the
for the
third
second one, and he has like a bag over his face, like with a hole in it.
Yeah, I think that's right. It doesn't show up until the third one.
So I wanted to say, going into my expectations of it, I've also seen this movie a million times. So how do you even have expectations for it watching it again? It's a little weird for me to watch in the summer, because I like to watch all my slashers in October, leading up to Halloween. But I wanted to say, for anyone who, especially young people who are maybe discovering horror movies, learning more about film and all that, I think you could have kind of totally wrong expectations if you think it's going to be Friday the 13th as you know it, because of the lack of Jason as the antagonist and his iconic hockey mask and all that. You'll be like, oh, surprising. This is not what I thought it was, which could be good or could be bad. Um, so, all that to say, this is a movie that might have surprising expectations for certain people.
Yeah.
Now let's get into it. The movie kicks off with showing us the original, or the, the first killing. What starts this whole thing back in 1958, when the camp counselors are murdered, setting the stage for, what is it, 20 years later, when they're working to reopen the camp now. But all the locals have weird stories about it.
Camp Blood.
Yeah, Camp Blood. Garrett, I'd love to hear a little bit from you about this opening, being that it was your movie.
I love the opening.
Yeah.
I really do think it sets a good tone for what you're about to kind of get into. you see immediately the kind of POV version of the killer, so that sets the structure for that. You see kids at camp, you know, getting into camp tropes, if you will. If they're playing around with each other, getting drunk and doing all the stuff you're not supposed to be doing at camp, and they're shown as neglect, right? And so then you jump forward and you have all of these kids getting things ready. But once you see Ralph, the town drunk, and he's trying to warn them, man, you know something's up, because ain't nobody else like Ralph. He is one of a kind, it seems. But he right. And I also like the whole entire back and forth between Annie and the truck driver, where he starts off as like, seemingly kind of nice, and then just becomes creepy and rude as she's trying to just find her way to this camp and make it there. But it definitely feels like the early 70s and 80s. So again, it sets the vibe. People are just like, whatever, man, I'm just here to go camping and cook for kids. So I think it's a fun way to set the tone.
Yeah. But she even does not make it very long. It takes her some real. She's got to really try to get to this camp for some reason. She's riding with the truck driver. Then she ends up riding with this other guy who freaks her out, and she jumps out of the car.
I mean, we assume with the killer, I think.
Well, right.
Yeah.
Because she ends up kind of dead in a ditch, literally.
Dead.
Slashed as she arrives at the camp.
They slashed her.
The hash-slinging slasher. SpongeBob, anyone? No.
No Sparatu.
See, David gets it. Yeah, we get that point of view killer thing again, which is another. Wasn't that in Halloween? Was that a? I feel like that was something else that was kind of maybe inspired by.
Yeah, I think we had some POV with Halloween, and
Michael Myers POV.
Yeah, I found it really interesting that this first teen character that we're introduced to, who comes around, she's asking, hey, can you take me to Camp Crystal Lake? Those. I found it really interesting that she's not. I assumed, just because of like her time, the point in which she's introduced, and her setup, I was surprised she's not like the final girl. She's not like the character you're supposed to kind of like ride through most of this movie with.
That's what I don't get. She's a camp counselor, and like, why is she hitchhiking to camp?
Yeah,
What is this?
Going like a long way to get there, and then she doesn't even make it. Right. She's the first one to go.
When you have a dream, she's like 17. She's got a dream to cook for kids at a camp. I mean, that is her long. She will do anything, like hitchhike from wherever she's from to get to Camp Crystal Lake to execute that dream.
So much of that wet, hot American summer stuff comes in. Ain't nobody gonna be doing that. And also, everybody just wanting to drink and have sex.
Yeah. It was, and yeah, the PO. But to go back to the POV stuff, I thought was really interesting. It wasn't really what I was expecting from this. I knew that there was kind of like a surprise, more or less, of who the killer was, but I didn't realize so much the movie was going to be played out that way, with the, seeing it from the killer's perspective. I thought that kind of was interesting at times, but also really kind of made everything feel, I don't know, kind of I don't know. Like, yeah. I don't know. I it wasn't as visceral, doing it that way sometimes.
Right. Once we get to meet the real people that we're going to be watching in this movie, the actual main characters, they seem to be like pretty general teenagers. I mean, they're hanging out at the camp. They're getting things ready for opening. They're getting to know each other better, hanging out, all this fun stuff. Yeah, literally getting to know each other better. And then, again, we get more moments of these POV of, again, assumingly the killer, who is watching them this whole time throughout the day as they're getting ready for all of this stuff. I really like that as just like a device to add some tension in there.
Well, and we also don't know at this point in time who the killer is.
We have no idea who it is.
Seeing this for the first time in 1980, whenever it came out, you don't know about Jason. You don't know about the hockey mask. You don't have that lore. So you have no idea who's watching these people. All you know is that in the past, people have been killed and murdered. And so that's all that you know. Yeah. And so it is really creepy to kind of be watching along. and seeing these kids just living life without knowing that they're being watched. It's super creepy.
And putting myself in the perspective of, say, someone who's watching this for the first time in 1980, they do a good job of they do a good job of leading you to believe the killer, isn't like wearing something mysterious. They're not like, they're very unassuming, because the first person we meet them is Annie, the hitchhiking chef with a dream. She's not scared of the person. She gets right in their Jeep, rides along with them. It's not until they pass by Camp Crystal Lake that she's like, hey, what's going on here? And even the shot where you briefly get to see the feet of the killer doesn't in any way imply male, female, height. It's just like a pair of shoes and a pair of black pants. That's all you really get to see. So they do a really good job of, like, you have a feeling, you're like, okay, well, they must not be too weird looking or anything, but also they must be pretty tough, because they're hunting these people down. So I thought, a decent job of sort of keeping the killer mysterious.
Yeah, for sure they do. And then, as he really starts to ramp up, we get the whole pretty on the nose symbolism of a storm approaching when nightfall comes. And then the fun starts to happen, and Jason starts to, not Jason.
No, not Jason.
Not Jason. Correction.
The killer.
The killer begins to take out these counselors one by one as they continue to freak out, but also, like, try to go about their business. They continue to, like, who are the two? There's a couple that hook up while there's like a dead guy in the bunk above them. They don't even know what's going on.
Kevin Bacon and the other girl.
Jack and Marcy. Yeah, Kevin Bacon. That's his scene stealer.
Well, it is Kevin Bacon.
And I gotta say too, the killer's getting through these kids pretty quick. Like once the killing starts, it's pretty like one by one, like one, and then the other, and then the other, and before you know it, there's like two of them left, and they don't even know anybody's been murdered yet.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the crazy thing, is like a few of them have already been murdered, and then we get to this group of them playing strip Monopoly, which is new to me. I don't know how
that
strip
seems.
Monopoly works.
No, that seems like I guess maybe if you land on a hotel, instead of giving the cash, you give to ass. I don't know.
Well, see, the thing with strip Monopoly, I feel like, is the game Monopoly is kind of so complex. I feel like you're going to be nude very soon.
Yeah, it's not going to take too long.
But then, like, have a lot of game left.
Yeah, I mean, the game of Monopoly could take hours.
Maybe the point isn't Monopoly. Is it not?
No, I don't think I don't think anybody's
I don't think the point of their game was Monopoly, but it was very funny.
Winning is more than just having the most hotels in that game.
Yeah, for sure.
But then when Brenda leaves, she leaves that scenario. She goes to the bathroom, and where a previous character had been murdered, in probably one of the more violent ones in the movie, where she gets like hit in the head with an axe. And eventually Brenda winds her way up, I think, at like the archery course, and the lights come on, and she's all blinded. That was actually, to me, one of the I thought one of the more scary sequences in the movie, where
because she's chasing. She hears this voice calling for help.
She hears like this voice calling. She's like, "What's on?" And like she's at the archery range. Lights are all on, and that's always like, with how dark this movie is a lot, because it's a pretty dark movie at times. In terms of, I mean, like lighting wise, like it's pitch black for a good portion of the movie. So they have these lights on bright, and she can't see. I was expecting her to just get like riddled with arrows, but the next time we see her, she's just like choked in like rope and stuff. So there was a variety of kills. It wasn't just like just knives or anything like that. Like people got stabbed with arrows. They got stabbed with
most people
they got hit with axes.
Yeah.
There was the axe kill though, and then, so yeah, there was a good variety of murders. Like none of these characters really get too much to really make them feel like individuals.
They're not at all. No,
but
they're very one-dimensional characters.
Yeah, they're horned up camp kids.
And then, like I said, there's like 6 kids plus the guy who's like in charge, the guy who wears like the really type denim shorts.
That got creepy. Creepy.
And he comes. So there's like 6 counselors plus him. He comes back and just dies immediately.
Yeah.
He's like, hey, what are you doing here? Um, and all that happens before the last two people don't even know anybody's gone. And I don't even think the guy, maybe Bing Crosby's kid, I don't know, even realized that like he died not even knowing at all what's
Yeah, I
going on.
think Annie was the only, or the final girl was
Alice.
the Alice.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think she was the only one who was unfortunate enough to find all of the bodies and have to live through that trauma, which is not great. But for me, again, having seen this movie so many times, this time I was a little surprised by the lack of violence that I kind of expected and the lack of gratuitous sex that I expected. I mean, I know you get those more as the franchise continues, but there wasn't as much as I remember in my brain. It's not as well put together, but like in my brain, this was just like again a ripoff of Halloween, but like with more nudity and violence, and that's not really the case. It was so that was kind of an interesting realization this time for me. What about you, Josh? Did you notice anything this time? You've rewatched. This is your
I don't know that I
X
know.
time rewatch.
I don't think I noticed anything new. I mean, I definitely have always had the same thoughts of, wow, you would expect it to be a bit more gory than it is, just based on, again, if you just think of Friday the 13th as the franchise and not just as this film. It's not as gory as you'd expect. There's blood and there's some, unsettling scenes, but it is not at all what we see even just a few years later into the 90s.
Yeah.
It gets a lot worse. So yeah, that is surprising. And just kind of the quiet creepiness of it all is also a little surprising. I guess you might expect
You know,
more of a loud summer camp thing.
three of the murders really happen off screen. There's the first guy who ends up, we see him sort of in the bunk above.
Ned.
Yeah, he dies off screen. Though, like I said, the woman at the archery range, once the lights go on, we sort of cut back to the other thing. We hear a scream, but we never see her physically killed. And then, and then Bill, the last guy, we see him. We're there with him in the generator room, and then Alice comes to find him, and he's pinned to the wall. So like, some of the big and it's gruesome stuff that we end up seeing, but it's not like like you said, it's not like we watch anybody get like super hacked to death or die by a million cuts or anything like that. It's a little more cerebral at times than you might expect.
And I also appreciated this time a lot more. I appreciated the twist. I think that, it's satisfying to go back and watch this and be like, wow, it's not Jason. It is his mom. There is a reason. And she's really like the woman who plays the mother. She's really creepy once she gets a chance to be on screen and show her character. And so it's super spooky. The second one from, leading into it is also pretty good, but they lost track and they focused on just one piece of it. And this one is such a good, start. I think that it has a bad rap some, but I was really surprised at how much more I enjoyed it than I expected to this time.
As we move on to that part, I have like 2 points I want to think. I was surprised that there was not more lore dropped at the in the course of the film before Mrs. Voorhees shows up. Like, I really thought we were going to get like a campfire scene where somebody explains what happened to Jason, and it's like, oh, scary, and they were going to like make all these illusions and stuff, or something like that. But it's really, and not until Miss Voorhees shows up you get any of that, and she kind of dumps all this information on you of like why she does this sort of thing. And I actually thought the movie really improves after she shows up. Like, I don't know what it was. I mean, before that it was interesting, but I thought that first the performance by Betsy Palmer was really good in that. She seemed really creepy and really unhinged. She makes sense as someone who seems unassuming, and why the first couple people like just were like, oh, hi, what are you doing? And like did not recognize her as a threat in any way. That said, I do think Alice does such a good job of fending her off at times that I was like, how did Mrs. Voorhees kill all these other people so easily? Because Alice is like, push, and she like falls over. I was like, I think Alice is just dominating this old lady, hitting her with frying pans and stuff. Like, that I think that once we got the reveal, it maybe dragged on a little too long, but I really did appreciate once we actually saw Mrs. Voorhees, the killer.
Well, and they, again, I noticed the structure of how they introduced the lore this time, if you will. And, the flashback takes you back to 1958. And just throughout, it's just kind of mentioned offhand as people were talking about it throughout the town and stuff. It was like, those two kids who died in 1958 and the drowning that happened before that, that is just offhandedly mentioned. Mm-hmm. But it's purposeful now that you look at it and see how it works. And then again, the flashback was there, and so when you are going through that's the reason why you have no idea who the killer is. And so at the end, the big reveal, she talks about the kids, but then she goes into the specifics about the drowning that was just offhandedly mentioned, and it connects so many things. And again, this is the first time as an adult that I've really paid attention to that, and yeah, it really improved what they were trying to do, and it showed that there was some really good storytelling that they were trying to get in there, in addition to just satisfying kills. And
yeah, the writer said he really thought that the idea of like the mother is the killer was a really cool idea that he wanted to run with.
I think it still holds up as a cool idea.
Mm-hmm.
He said
you don't
he was
see
really
a lot of
disappointed.
female serial killer like in real life or in like movie portrayal.
Miller, the director, said that he was really disappointed that they went with like in future sequels, Jason became the bad guy, because he always saw Jason as more of the victim than a villain. So then I think that is like a really fascinating departure that this thing went on to, is taking that character that was, and even like the image we see of Jason, I think is more implied to be sort of just a bad dream sequence as opposed to a thing.
Is it or isn't it? I
Yeah.
guess
Yeah, that's
what you're left with, because we do end with Alice, not asking where's the boy, and they're like, there's no boy, and she says then he's still in there.
Mm-hmm.
She certainly believes it was real, but
Yeah.
we see that image of him like exploding out of the water and pulling her in, and then she wakes up screaming in the hospital. So
Yeah, and can you imagine how, again, in 1980, that first time when you see, before she's in the hospital, when she's on the lake in the boat, and she's like, oh, dreamy and wispy and waspy and water and everything's happy, and then the demon child jumps out and grabs her. Can you imagine how terrified the people in the theater would have been for that? I mean, that is, anymore, it's not something that will, scare you unless you don't know it's coming. I assume, David, did it scare you as your first time seeing
No,
it?
because I had seen that clip before. Like I had seen that
Right.
particular clip from the movie.
Sure. So becomes expected, right? And so I think that, but at that time, man, they'd have peed themselves.
It was probably pretty cool. I imagine it's a great last jump scare kind of the movie. And I don't want to blow past that. Spoiler alert again. we joked about it. I don't want to blow past Alice completely cutting off Miss Voorhees' head, just like
Yes.
oh yeah, she decapitates. Bam.
she's like,
Clean cut.
I was
That's
a
why
little
we
taken
didn't see the
aback.
other. That's why we didn't see the other kills, because showing kills is expensive. You got blood, you got guts, you got to clean up, So they saved it all for the good one right there.
Anything else about the movie itself, or the
I do.
overall
I-
fandom?
Yeah, I want to go into some of the lore.
I feel like we need to get into the lore.
The second one I think is worth us revisiting. We don't have to do a show about it, but I think that we should watch it, because I do think that one is an interesting one from what I remember. You look at it from Alice's perspective. It ends with this, I think she is the person that you're following. And then she's dealing with the trauma of all of this. Mm-hmm. And then you do have Jason who takes over, which does make sense in the second movie, because he's avenging his mother's death or something like that. He was the victim, but then his mom was murdered, and so now he's trying to avenge that. And so there's some good aspects there. The third one is the one that I remember being like, okay, this is silly, because they're just experimenting with 3D for the first time, and so they're just like blatantly throwing crap at the
At the
screen.
screen.
And so that's when it kind of goes off the rails. But I do think
I
the second one is pretty good. Josh, did you see the second one at all, or have you only seen the first
I
one?
really cannot remember because like
Okay.
there's so many. Like we said, I have seen certain sequels. I've seen bits and pieces of others. It all runs together.
Sure.
I did watch because I did go ahead and watch the trailers for Friday the 13th Part 2 and Part 3. I found myself once it was done being like, I do kind of want to see more. Like just to kind of see how it all evolved over time, it'd be in retrospect. That was one of the ideas of this podcast to begin with, was just kind of like analyze the arc of a franchise and see like how does it get better, how does it get worse, what changes. And Friday the 13th Part 2 looked really interesting. Friday the 13th Part 2 3, the trailer was so over the top because they no joke say Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D 3 times. They have it, and we talk about trailer showing too much these days. Good grief, trailers in 1980, they were just like, here's the ending of the film.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a great part in that trailer where Jason pulls up a harpoon gun and shoots it at the screen, and it's just as slow as possible. Yeah, this franchise went crazy. There's
did.
Jason Takes Manhattan. There's 3 films in this franchise
From
that
the
indicate.
Muppets.
Yes, he took it away from the Muppets. Before Scream
Jason Goes
took
to
it back.
Space. I think that's
Jason
Jason X.
Jason X.
X. Yeah.
Jason
That's
Goes
the
to
one
Hell.
that I remember seeing the most. It was so ridiculous.
There are 3 films in this franchise that imply they're the last one in the franchise. There's Friday the 13th, the final chapter. That was the 4th film. There was, where is it? Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday. That was one as well. I think that's funny because neither of those would end up being the last, the last ones. I'm also kind of curious about the remake or reboot or whatever you call it, the 2009.
Oh
I'm kinda
man, I've
curious
seen that
about it
one
now.
too. Yeah, I've seen
Yeah, I
that
want
one
to watch.
too.
I want to watch that one now.
You should. It's worth a watch because there's some. I mean, I don't want to ruin anything. Just go watch it. It is very silly. It's got Danielle Panabaker and dude
Jared
from
Padalecki.
Jared Padalecki. Yes, from Supernatural. So it's got a good cast.
There is a future for this franchise. There is a television series prequel in development. It was originally announced in 2022 and has gone through some changes and a writer strike and all that good stuff. But as recently as March 25, so just a few months back, Linda Cardellini was cast as Pamela Voorhees in the show that is being executive produced by A24 and will air on Peacock.
Wow, those are things I like to hear.
Very
I love
interesting.
I love a horror Linda Cardellini,
Right.
and I love A24 horror most of
Right.
the time. So
So that is still to come. No plans really for a movie. It looks like seems they're focusing
That's
on the show
okay.
right now. But yeah, they're still working on it. So more Friday the 13th to come, hopefully. All right, let's get into our final review and rating here. Garrett, it's your film. You do the honors of going first.
I think that watching this movie for camp as opposed to horror was the right way to go because it gives a different perspective. I'm not looking at it to see how good of a horror movie it is. I'm just seeing if it's, it's campy, it's fun, it's tropey. And man, that really helped. It allowed me to see some things that I had never seen before and appreciate the movie in a different way that lets me appreciate the horror of it again. So honestly, I came out of my watching it as a 3 stars, but the conversation here has talked me up, so I'm gonna give it a 3.5. What about you, David?
Wow. Okay.
I did think that this was a little dull at times, but also it was pretty scary at times. There were a few moments where I was like, okay, the tension is working, the music is doing its thing. I thought that the POV direction I did not anticipate, so I did kind of enjoy that at times. Once the killer revealed themselves, I did find it a bit more interesting, although I thought that part kind of dragged out a little bit. I think I am going to settle in around a 3 as well, like a 3.0 as well. I thought it was really good for what it was. I don't know if I'd watch it over and over again. I don't know if I'd revisit it a bunch of times. But yeah, solid film.
Yeah, solid film. I'm gonna go with Garrett's 3.5. I think, for the same exact reasons. You watch it and you're like, yeah, 3, it's good. And you
Mhm.
talk about it. And you look at everything else it's done, and it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It really did a lot considering it was. I don't think it was like critically acclaimed. I don't really think any of the Friday the 13th franchise is something that's been like critically
Mhm.
adored, but financially, it's done well when it's needed to, and that's what matters, I guess. So yeah,
Mhm.
3.5 stars for me. I think it's really good considering almost no, like basically nothing in it matters for the rest of the franchise. The main character is
Yeah.
really not in it. None of the characters who are in it matter. Uh, but the last like 10 minutes set up the next 30 years of movies. So, truly,
I know it's become a parody of
it
itself. It's
is. It
ridiculous.
is.
It very
So
quickly became a parody of itself.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, well, let's then shift over and see what Letterboxd says about this movie. Is
Oh,
it?
so I
Oh,
unfortunately already saw the score for this movie.
oh, you did.
Yeah.
Well, then
Sorry,
you
Oh,
need to run the game.
I will run the game this week if that's okay with you
sweet.
guys.
We love the honesty.
I will
Yeah,
not complain about that, but I
I,
am
I,
still
I was trying to find a list of all the Friday the 13th movies, and I unintentionally popped in and saw the score.
fair enough.
Because I was curious how many of them they'd actually made. So, Garrett, you are still behind, so you do have the honor of still going first. And I will tell you that you are pretty close behind Josh. I'm in the lead with 11, I believe. And then Garrett, you are in last with only 6. However, or 4, excuse me. But Josh only has 6, so you can tie him up here with a direct hit.
I do feel like this is gonna live somewhere where we lived, right? 3.5, 3, somewhere in that range. 3.3.
Okay, 3.3 from Garrett.
Well, that
Josh
makes
from-
me want to just commit to our range and go for 3.5.
Okay, 3.5 from Josh. 3.3 from Garrett. 402,000 people have rated this movie on Letterboxd.
That's a lot of people.
1.7 thousand have it in their top 4. The winner this week is Garrett. However, not a direct hit. It is an even 3.0.
Oh, well,
On
that's because they
Letterboxd.
didn't talk about it with us to bump it up.
They,
Yeah.
We could have bumped a lot of people up. They just come talk to us on our podcast or listen to us. Maybe they would
Yeah.
have slightly better feelings. 3.0 is the most common rating, 31%. But 3.5 is the second most common. So a lot of people are sitting in our range of 3 or 3.5. So, that's where it evens out.
Awesome.
Oh, I didn't read any popular reviews. I apologize for that.
That's okay. You don't need to.
Do you want to hear some anyway?
Sure.
One is a very Scooby-Doo episode. That's a 3-star review. Let's see. Is this going to be a long one? Okay, this one has spoilers. There's not enough horror movies with killers wearing cable knit sweaters. That's a 2.5-star one. And then this is no star ratings for this one. Not a cell phone in sight, just teenagers being murdered.
As
Oh,
it should.
yeah. Those were the days.
No, yes. Those
don't know.
were the days. Yeah, they really were. Okay, well, that's going to do it for us at Camp Crystal Lake and Summer Camp June. But June's not done, clearly.
No.
We have more to talk about. So we'll be back next week, probably with a mid-year review, I think is what we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Catching up on what we've been talking about all year long, because somehow 2025 is halfway over, which I am both thrilled about and shocked by.
Yeah.
Where does it go?
It's crazy. Anyway, let us know what you think about Friday the 13th. We'd love to hear from you on our social media. You can go to Instagram, TikTok, or Threads, or you can join our Discord over at somanysequels.com and talk to us there. We also have links to our episodes, our blog, and everything else that we're doing all right there at somanysequels.com. So go check that out. We will see you guys next time. Bye.